Digital.
And welcome to Music 101. Music 101 is created to empower music itself and legendary icon in the music industry. Another week, another great episode on Music 101. Are or what are the key moments in the history of rock and roll and rock visual
Well,
culture?
it's a great question because it's hard to say precisely when rock and roll began, though the genre has its roots in American music such as jazz, rhythm and blues, boogie woogie, and gospel, as well as in country music. There are several contenders insofar as records go, although I have my favorite as well. What are some of the candidates? That's easier to identify, but the trick is to pick out the one that is arguably first. Was it Sister Rosetta Tharpe's Strange Things Happening Every Day in 1944, or perhaps Rocket 88, first recorded in Memphis by Jackie Brenston's and his Delta Cats in 1951, or Bill Haley and his Comets 1955 single, Rock Around the Clock? It's hard to say for sure, but this will be a look at the earliest sounds of rock and roll until we talk about things being visual as well, because television and visual medium coming in. To count us off, the sister was ahead of her time. Jackie Brenston is the first, and Bill Haley solidified rock and roll as the musical force to be reckoned with. Regardless of what song tripped off rock and roll, what we do know is that rock and roll became a defined mainstream genre during the 1950s when the sound and the image coalesced around one man, Elvis Presley. Elvis took rock music to new and giddy heights, bringing about a seismic shift in popular culture and causing deep concern among certain sections of society that considered rock as once the blues were considered the devil's music. Once unleashed, however, there was no going back. Rock and roll was here to stay. In conclusion, here are some of the most defining moments in the history of the genre, from the king himself to the rise of MTV.
The defining moments for sure. And how did Elvis define rock and roll, Mr. Mike?
Arguably, Elvis Presley's first rock and roll recording is That's All Right, recorded on July 5th, 1954, at Sun Studio in Memphis. And when you get a chance, you must go to Sun Studio. It's a phenomenal place, as is Memphis itself. It was a spontaneous moment. Elvis, during a break, started fooling around with Arthur Big Boy Crudup's blues song, speeding it up and adding its flair. Producer Sam Phillips immediately recognized something special and had them record it properly. Many historians and critics point to That's All Right as the birth of Elvis's rock and roll style, blending blues, country, and pop into something brand new. Here's the quick story behind that famous session. In early July 1954, Elvis Presley, guitarist Scotty Moore, and bassist Bill Black were at Sun Studio with producer Sam Phillips. They were having a rough time. Nothing they recorded sounded right. During a break, Elvis started casually goofing off, playing and singing That's All Right in a fast, upbeat style. Bill Black and Scotty Moore jumped in, and then the jam caught Sam Phillips's attention. Immediately, Phillips, who had been looking for a white artist who could sing with the feel of rhythm and blues, told him to stop fooling around and record it properly. That recording, raw, energetic, and completely different from anything on the radio, became That's All Right. And when it was played on Dewey Phillips's, no relation to Sam, radio show, Red Hot and Blue, just days later, the phone lines blew up with excited listeners. It launched Elvis's career and changed popular music forever. Now, there actually is a best movie or film clip about Elvis's session. And in 2022, the movie Elvis does a vivid and stylized recreation of That's All Right session. And Austin Butler playing Elvis captures the spontaneous, almost magical energy of the moment beautifully. It shows the looseness, the nervousness, and then the sudden electricity when Elvis finds the sound. It's dramatized, but it nails the spirit. It's a great clip to take a look at. And there's also a quote from Sam Phillips himself about that night, too. Here's a great quote from Phillips about that night Elvis recorded That's All Right. All of a sudden, Elvis just started singing the song, jumping around and acting the fool. And Bill and Scotty just started playing along. I know we had something, and I just said, hold it, let's try to get that on tape. In conclusion, Phillips later
Mhm.
reflected that in that spontaneous moment, Elvis captured something completely new, a sound that blended rhythm and blues with white country music, something Phillips had been dreaming of finding.
Mr. Mick, other than Elvis in early rock and roll, what other key moment should be mentioned?
Yes, we have to say something about 1955, and that's Chuck Berry releases Maybelline. Berry blends rhythm and blues with country, pioneering the rock sound. So, why is Maybelline 1955 so important? That song is considered one of the very first true rock and roll songs because Chuck Berry did something evolutionary and revolutionary. He fused the rhythm and blues traditions of music with the storytelling and twang of country music. Barry took a traditional country song based loosely on Ida Red by Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, sped it up, added a hard driving, distorted guitar riff, and sang about cars, love, and youthful rebellion, themes that would become central to early rock and roll. This blend isn't just musical, it broke cultural barriers at a time when American music and American society were still very segregated. Maybelline crossed over from R&B charts to the mainstream pop charts, reaching a huge and diverse audience. When Chuck Berry recorded the song, American society in the Democratic Party South was still deeply segregated. Black artists usually stayed confined to race record charts, and white audiences mostly listened to country or pop. But capitalism, the drive to make money, pushed back past those artificial barriers. Maybelline was simply too exciting to ignore. Record companies, radio DJs, and jukebox owners saw that this energetic new sound could sell not just to Black audiences, but to all teenagers hungry for something fresh and rebellious. Even though racism was still strong, the profit motive made many businesses overlook it. DJs started playing Maybelline on stations that normally wouldn't touch Black artists. Stores began stocking the record for a broader market. All teenagers, regardless of their background, jumped on to create a groundswell. The success of that one song showed that if a product, in this case, a rock and roll song, could make money, it didn't matter as much as who made it in a very real way. Capitalism helped force the doors of racial segregation wide open to popular music because money was more powerful than prejudice. The only color that mattered was green. Chuck Berry also became one of the first rock stars to show that the guitar, not the piano or saxophone, would be the lead instrument in rock and roll. In conclusion, his guitar licks and Maybelline laid the blueprint for future generations of rock musicians.
Indeed, Mr. Elvis, thank you so much for your legacy to the world. Mr. Mick, who introduced a rebellious spirit.
Before we talk about rebellion, we could talk about the style and energy because we will get to that rebellion too. 1955, same year, Little Richard breaks through with Tutti Frutti. His outrageous style and energy redefined performance. One of the original rock and roll greats, Little Richard merged the fire of gospel with New Orleans R&B, pounding the piano and wailing with gleeful abandon. While numerous other R&B greats of the early 50s had been moving in a similar direction, none match Richard's vocals, sheer electricity, with his bullet speed deliveries, ecstatic trills, and the overjoyed force of his personality and his singing. He was crucial in upping the voltage from high-powered R&B into the similar yet different guise of rock and roll. Although he was only a hit maker for a couple of years or so, his influence upon both the soul and British invasion stars of the 1960s was vast, and his early hits remain classics of the rock repertoire. Heavily steeped in gospel music while growing up in Georgia, when Little Richard began recording in the early 50s, he played unexceptional jump R&B blues that owed a lot to his early inspirations, Billy Wright and Roy Brown. In 1955, at Lloyd Price's suggestion, Richard sent a demo tape to Specialty Records, who were impressed enough to sign him and arrange a session for him in New Orleans. That session, however, didn't get off the ground until Richard began fooling around with an obscene ditty during a break. Charles Connor, Little Richard's drummer from 1953 to 1950, shares the original lyrics, and there's also a clip from a historian, bass player with Little Richard for over 30 years, who talked about it. So it's actually kind of an obscene ditty, but he cleaned it up a bit. With those significantly cleaned up lyrics, Tutti Frutti was the record that gave birth to Little Richard as he is now known. The gleeful woo sound, the furious piano playing, the sax driven pedal to the metal rhythm section was also his first hit, although Pat Boone's cover version outdid Richard's on the hit parade. In 1956 and 57, Richard reeled off a string of classic hits: Long Tall Sally, Slippin' and Slidin', Jenny Jenny, Keep a Knockin', Good Golly Miss Molly, The Girl Can't Help It, that remain the foundation of his fame. While Richard's inimitable mania was the key to his best records, he also owed a lot of his success to the gutsy playing of New Orleans session players like Lee Allen on tenor sax, Alvin Tyler, Barry sax, and especially Earl Palmer, the drummer. They usually accompanied the singer in both New Orleans and Los Angeles studios. Richard's unforgettable appearances in early rock and roll movies, especially a great scene from The Girl Can't Help It, did a lot to spread the rock and roll gospel to the masses. Richard was at the height of his commercial and artistic powers when he suddenly quit the business during an Australian tour in late 1957, enrolling in a Bible college in Alabama shortly after his returning to the States. In conclusion, Little Richard burst on the scene and he had the feeling, the call of religion for a while before his announcement, but it was nonetheless a shock to both his fans and the music industry.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your contributions in the music industry. So, Mr. Mick, Chuck Berry has been mentioned, but is not his guitar sounds a key moment?
Yes, and I did want to mention before saying something about Chuck, it's another guy who came back, and it was, of course, the guy who started it all, is Elvis, because he had to still cross over to the mainstream. He appeared on national TV to bring rock and roll into American living rooms. And this is, of course, his crucial appearance on Ed Sullivan. He had been on some other shows, but it was really Ed Sullivan that put him over the top. September 9th, 1956 is his first appearance. At this point, Elvis had put out several successful singles, and his debut album, Elvis Presley, released in March 56, was the first rock and roll album to make it to the top of the charts. Elvis had yet to cement his status as the king of rock and roll, but his first performance on Ed Sullivan can be seen as his coronation. He performed several songs, including Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, and Love Me Tender, in front of screaming audience members at the studio and was watched from home. Despite ongoing fears that his hip shaking gyrations would corrupt the nation's youth, viewers went full ahead to the shots and the 21-year-old singer's performance. The show was a massive success. 60 million people, estimated at 82.6% of the entire television audience at the time, tuned in to watch the then 21-year-old perform. In conclusion, Elvis once again was the most important key performer in rock and roll.
Indeed. Elvis. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and talents to the world. Until now, we are lingering to your music. And Mr. Mick, what was the worst tragedy and key moments in early rock and roll?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that before we get to that because you had asked about the rebellious spirit. I do want to mention it because this
Oh
is the
yes,
killer. Got to
sorry.
mention the killer.
The rebellious spirit, yes.
Yes, the rebellious spirit. It was 1957. Jerry Lee Lewis releases Great Balls of Fire. He also was the primary inspiration to my musical hero, the singer songwriter Ian Hunter. There's this wild piano driven rock that helped define the genre's rebellious spirit. Jerry Lee Lewis belting out Great Balls of Fire in a version that's different from his Sun 45 release. It's also on a clip. You can see that on YouTube. It's taken from the 1957 rock and roll film Jamboree. This wild piano pounding anthem perfectly captured the untamed spirit of early rock and roll. Unlike the guitar driven hits then dominating the charts, Lewis brought the piano front and center, attacking with a furious energy that made the instrument seem just as rebellious and dangerous as any electric guitar. So there's Lewis sitting down, but making it sound like he's moving all over the stage because he was a wild player. His frantic playing combined with the unhinged musical style turned Great Balls of Fire into an instant sensation and a defining moment for the genre. Beyond just the sound, Lewis's performances were electric. He didn't just play the piano, he kicked it, stood on it, and turned every live appearance into something between a revival meeting and a riot. Great Balls of Fire wasn't just music, it was a show of raw, youthful defiance. The song's lyrics, filled with passion and innuendo, and Lewis's wild stage presence, pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in mainstream entertainment at the time, alarming parents but thrilling teenagers across America. Great Balls of Fire solidified Jared Lee Lewis as one of the rock's first true wild men, helping to set the template for the rebellious image that would define rock stars for decades to come. It proved that rock and roll wasn't just about the sound, it was about attitude, spectacle, and a complete break from the past. In conclusion, in less than 2 minutes, Lewis captured the raw, explosive spirit that made early rock and roll feel like something new and dangerous.
Indeed. So where does Chuck Berry has already mentioned, right? With his
Yes.
guitar sound key moment.
Yeah, so this is his guitar sound. So, 1958, Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good was released, and the song becomes the definitive rock guitar anthem. The song is not just a hit, but Chuck carved out the blueprint for the rock guitar anthem. From that opening riff, sharp and full of swagger, Berry made the electric guitar the true star of the show. No one had heard anything quite like it before. Johnny Be Good wasn't just about a kid dreaming of fame, it was about how the guitar itself became the voice of ambition, rebellion, and freedom. In less than 3 minutes, Berry captured the heartbeat of rock and roll, fast, loud, and full of possibility. What makes Johnny Be Good so lasting isn't just the technical brilliance, though there's plenty of that, it's the raw, infectious spirit baked into every note. Berry turned a simple story about a country boy with a guitar into a universal rock myth, one that would inspire countless kids from the Beatles to Bruce Springsteen to pick up a guitar and chase their dreams. In conclusion, even today, if you want to explain to someone what rock and roll feels like, you could just play those first few bars and they get it instantly.
Indeed. What was the worst tragedy that the key moments of early rock and roll, Mr. Mick?
Yes, now is an appropriate time to talk about this because once we get rock and roll going, what happened? It was 1959, the day the music died. There's a plane crash that kills Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper, a tragedy that marked the end of rock's first innocent era. So, what if Buddy Holly and maybe Richie Valens hadn't died in 1959? If Buddy Holly had survived that crash, rock and roll might have followed a very different path. Holly wasn't just another teen idol, he was already pushing the boundaries of what rock and roll could be. While most artists were still focused on cranking out hit singles, Holly was thinking in terms of albums, layered production, and deeper songwriting. There's a real chance he would have helped pioneer the idea of the rock album years before it became standard with artists like the Beatles or Bob Dylan. The momentum of early rock could have stayed strong too. After Holly's death, combined with Elvis going into the army, Chuck Berry's legal troubles, and Little Richard stopping away to become a minister, the original fire of rock and roll cooled off. Without Holly to lead the charge, pop music softened into a safer, more manufactured act. But if Holly had stayed in the game, his energy and innovation might have kept the spirit of rock 50s alive and evolving straight into the 60s. It's also pretty thrilling to imagine him interacting directly with the next wave. The Beatles worship Buddy Holly. They even partly named their band after his critics, but he only influenced them from a distance. If Holly had lived, he could have collaborated with them, challenged them, or simply inspired them face to face. Same with Dylan and the Rolling Stones. Holly toured England and he just missed an opportunity as the fledgling Beatles were starting to coalesce. Holly might have been right in the thick of that creative explosion instead of just a ghost behind it. Given how experimental Holly already was, it's easy to picture him embracing the folk rock movement, trying psychedelia, and even helping invent country rock long before those others picked up those threads. His ability to blend country, blues, and pop would have made him an artist who could adapt to the massive changes the 1960s would bring. And Richie Valens, he was just 17 when he died, but he already showed incredible promise. If he had lived, he might have been one of rock's true first Latino superstars. breaking down barriers that wouldn't fully crack open until Santana and Los Lobos decades later. His success showed that capitalism rewarded talent from any ethnic group, and teenagers of all backgrounds embraced it. Released in 1958, La Bamba was a groundbreaking song, a traditional Mexican folk tune transformed into a rock and roll classic. Valens' version became the first Spanish language song to break into the top charts in the US, reaching number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100. It showcased his unique blend of rock, rhythm and blues, and Chicano heritage, leaving a lasting impact on music history. The tragedy inspired at least one great song about their deaths, which is Don McLean's American Pie. If Buddy Holly and Richie Valens had lived, rock music might have stayed rawer, evolved faster, just when American capitalism encouraged inclusivity. In conclusion, the day the music died might never have come at all.
Indeed. So, Mr. Mick, what was the key new sound forming?
Well, in 1960 was a formation of the Beatles. In Liverpool, a new sound is brewing. In spite of all the danger, 1958 is their earliest known recording when they were still called the Quarrymen. It's raw and simple, but you can already hear that blend of melody and youthful emotion that would later define them. A clip from Nowhere Boy illustrates this key moment about the Beatles. Thereafter, they recorded Some Other Guy live in the Cavern Club in Liverpool in 1962, and there's even rough footage of it. Some Other Guy wasn't written by the Beatles. It was originally an R&B song by Richie Barrett, but their version crackles with the raw energy, tight harmonies, and punchy rhythm that would soon become their signature. Even at that early stage, you can hear how different they were from the typical club bands. In conclusion, Lennon's gritty vocals, McCartney's driving bass, and Harrison's sharp guitar already hinted that this wasn't just another bar band covering American hits. They were turning it into something new and distinctly their own.
Something new indeed. How did the key moment of Beatlemania begin, Mr. Mick?
Well, 1962, the Beatles' first single, Love Me Do, was released, and that was the start of Beatlemania. There are actually three versions of Love Me Do, and each one has a slightly different feel depending on who's drumming and when it was recording. Their early Pete Best demo, the earlier version, was recorded at an audition session in 1962 in June with Pete Best, the Beatles' original drummer, before Ringo joined on drums. The recording was part of the EMI edition, but it was rough, and the band, especially George Martin, the producer, wasn't impressed with Pete's drumming, not long after actually sacking him or firing him. The Ringo version, recorded on September 4th, 62, with Ringo Starr on drums, this was the first proper EMI recording with Ringo as a full Beatle. Although he was a professional performer, his drumming is a little shaky as he had just joined the band, so George Martin, the producer, wasn't confident in releasing it, but this version has a raw charm. Then there's the Andy White version, recorded on September 11th, 1962, with Andy White, a session drummer hired by George Martin on drums, while Ringo was moved to tambourine. Finally, this is the version that most people know because it was used on the album Please Please Me and most later releases. It's a little cleaner and more polished compared to the Ringo version. So there are different versions that can be compared and to one another. So, in conclusion, three versions of the first song that started Beatlemania.
Three version indeed. So when they played live, what was the song that best captured Beatlemania?
The song that best captures Beatlemania, the pure frenzy, the screaming fans, the feeling of total cultural takeover is I Want to Hold Your Hand. Released in late 1963 in the UK and early 64 in the US, it wasn't just a hit, it was the spark that lit the explosion. The song sent the Beatles to number one in America for the first time, right before their historic Ed Sullivan Show appearance. Musically, it's bursting with energy, the hand claps, the irresistible melody, the way John and Paul's voices intertwine. It feels like pure excitement in song form. I Want to Hold Your Hand didn't just top charts, it ignited a social phenomenon. When people talk about the insane airport receptions, the screaming crowds drowning out concerts, and teenagers completely losing their minds, this is the song that made all of that happen on a global scale. So there's a couple of live performances where you can see Beatlemania in action, and they're wild. The 1964 appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, it sparks the British invasion. This was February 9th of 64. It's the moment when Beatlemania officially hit America like a tidal wave. The Beatles performed the song to an audience of 73 million people, more than a third of the US population at the time. The studio crowd, mostly teenagers, is screaming constantly. You can barely hear the band over the shrieks. The camera keeps cutting to girls crying, covering their mouth, or shaking uncontrollably. It's pure pop culture history. The complete live performance is worth watching. There's also an appearance at the Washington Coliseum on February 11th of 64. 2 days after Ed Sullivan, the Beatles played their first full U.S. concert. They blast through I Want to Hold Your Hand with raw, youthful energy. The stage was in the middle of the arena, so after a few songs, they would physically spin the drum riser around so different parts of the crowd could see them. Chaos, fans throwing jelly beans, a screaming nonstop, jumping the barriers. It's gritty and less polished than TV, but that makes it even more exciting. In conclusion, the entire concert is manic.
Indeed, the crowded are so crazy about it. So, Mr. Mick, let's do part two of our topic today, rock and roll for visual culture. How would you wrap up our first episode about rock and roll?
Yeah, so we see really the beginnings of rock and roll and how we started, and then we transition into what is considered rock as opposed to rock and roll. So when we go to part two, I think you're going to see that the extension of the Beatles, the key moment of artists like Bob Dylan, Dylan Goes Electric, all kinds of things that are still in the future, because then we start seeing the British invasion and video visual appearances, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Woodstock, and all that great stuff as well. But I think here we get a good introduction to the key moments of rock and roll.
Indeed, people, tune in next week because Mr. Mick and I will continue the discussion about rock visual culture. Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. That's the Dr. Digital podcast and also the Idea to Author course now, because I got an entire course on writing, and you can check me out on the free version, which is on Facebook, the Idea to Author Coach. So check that out. Also a couple books on Amazon, Learning America, and also On Track, Ian Hunter.
Yes, people, I'm inviting you to please do listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to empower, of course, our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, stay as full.
More to come, people. See you soon.